Breaking news tonight. A teen girl, Stefanie, just 13, is lost in the woods. Say her parents.
Phone. It was her grandfather's phone. We had bought an old simple phone. We didn't even know it could connect to the internet.
This girl here is 14 years old. Stefanie Damron. She grew up in the small town of New Sweden, Maine. A rural community in the heart of Aroostook County. A place surrounded by forests, farms and quiet roads where life moves at a slower pace. People know their neighbors. Families pass down homes and traditions. Strangers are rare. On the surface, it is the kind of town where you would never expect a story like this to unfold. Stefanie lived with her family in this close-knit setting. At home, she was like many other teenagers. She laughed with her friends, argued with her siblings, and carried the everyday worries of a girl balancing school and family life. Those who knew her describe her as bright but reserved, someone who could be playful when comfortable, but often quiet in new situations. She attended the local school, where teachers recognized her curiosity. She wasn't the loudest in class, but she listened, she observed, and she had her own way of standing out. Friends remember a girl who could be funny and warm once you got past her shyness. Someone who liked to blend in but still had her own spark. Life in Aroostook County is not like life in a city. Entertainment is simple. Friends gather in homes, in small parks, or at school events. Social circles overlap. Everyone knows who's related to who, and family ties run deep. For Stefanie, that meant her world was centered around her family, her school, and the woods that surrounded her home. But like any teenager, she wasn't without her struggles. Being 14 can be complicated. It is the age where you begin testing boundaries, pushing against the rules, wanting independence but still depending on your family. Stefanie was no different. At home, her relationship with her sister was both close and tense, as many sibling relationships are. They argued, they laughed, they tested each other. On good days they shared secrets. On bad days they clashed. To outsiders, those arguments might seem small, even meaningless, but for teenagers, they can feel enormous in the moment. Welcome to Detective Daniel Files. Before we begin today's case, I want to know who's with us. Tell me your name, and where in the world you're watching from, because together, we're not just an audience, we're a community, searching for truth, and demanding justice. And if you believe every missing person deserves to be found, every victim deserves their story told, then hit subscribe right now. Don't just watch, stand with us. Join this movement for justice. On September 23, 2024, it was one of those ordinary sibling arguments. A disagreement that began inside the house between two sisters. It wasn't unusual. It wasn't violent. It was the kind of dispute that happens in homes everywhere. But for reasons no one could have predicted, that simple moment became the turning point in this story. Stefanie walked away from the argument. She left the house on West Road and stepped into the woods nearby. At first her family thought it was just to cool off, to get some space, to let emotions settle. After all, it wasn't the first time a teenager stormed out after a disagreement. But this time, she didn't come back. In those few minutes, the rhythm of normal family life changed forever. What began as a regular day in New Sweden turned into the start of a mystery that has now stretched on for months. A normal girl, in a normal town, vanished into the trees. And it is that shift from ordinary to unexplainable that makes this case so haunting. Because behind every missing person story is a life that seemed steady, predictable, and safe, until the moment it wasn't. September 23, 2024, a Monday in New Sweden, Maine. Nothing unusual, no warning signs, just another day in a quiet town. At home, 14-year-old Stefanie Damron argued with her sister. It wasn't violent, it wasn't unusual. Families argue, sisters clash. But this argument would be the last time anyone saw her. Stefanie left the house. She stepped outside and walked toward the woods on West Road, a place she knew well. The trees were close. The paths were familiar. To her family, it looked like she just needed space. A walk to cool down. She didn't pack a bag. She didn't bring her phone. She wore only jeans, a long-sleeved blue shirt, and her black Harley-Davidson hiking boots. Clothes for a short walk, not for running away. Her family watched her step away. That moment is burned into memory. She walked to the edge of the woods, and then she was gone. At first, no one panicked. Arguments end. Teenagers cool off. Everyone expected her to come back, but minutes turned into hours, and she did not return. That is when the questions began. Did Stefanie plan to come back, or was this walk meant to be more permanent? Did she slip deeper into the woods, or did someone meet her there? The timeline is clear, up to the moment she disappeared into the trees. After that, nothing. No footprints, no signs, no messages. By nightfall, fear replaced hope. Stefanie was missing, and the ordinary day had become the start of a mystery. The woods grew quiet after Stefanie stepped inside. Her family waited, expecting her to return. Minutes passed. then an hour. Still no sign of her. At first, there was no panic. She had walked off before after arguments. Everyone believed she would come back once emotions cooled. But this time felt different. The family searched the immediate area. They called her name. They checked the paths near the house. They looked for movement between the trees. Nothing. As the sun began to set, concern grew. The woods turned darker. The silence felt heavier. Every minute made the fear stronger. Calls were made to friends and neighbors. No one had seen her. No one knew where she had gone. By evening, her family contacted the police. Local officers arrived and began asking questions. When did she leave? What was she wearing? Did she take anything with her? The answers pointed to the same conclusion. She had left with nothing. The search pushed deeper into the woods. Flashlights cut through the dark. Voices called out her name. Dogs were brought in, hoping to pick up a trail. But the night gave nothing back. No footprints. No clothing. No sounds. By midnight there was still no trace. The first night ended with more questions than answers. By morning it was clear. This was no longer a simple family dispute. Stefanie was missing, and the search was only beginning. Morning broke over New Sweden on September 24th, 2024. The night had brought no answers. Stefanie had not returned. She had not called. She had not been seen by anyone in the hours since she walked into the woods. What began as a family argument now carried the weight of something far more serious. The local police, already involved from the night before, knew they needed more help. By dawn, the Maine State Police joined the effort. It was no longer just a family looking for their daughter. It was now a coordinated search. Troopers began by retracing the last known steps. The woods along West Road became the center of attention. Searchers spread out in lines, moving slowly, scanning the ground for anything that might point to where Stefanie had gone. They looked for footprints, broken branches, or pieces of clothing that might have snagged along the way, but there was nothing. The earth gave back no signs of her passing. The search expanded. Fields around the property were combed. Nearby barns and sheds were opened, checked, and cleared. Abandoned cabins in the area, common in rural Maine, were searched in case Stefanie had taken shelter. Still, nothing. Canine units were brought in. Dogs trained to pick up human scent were unleashed into the woods. Their handlers guided them along the paths, into clearings, and down toward water sources. For hours they worked, circling back, moving in tighter patterns when something seemed close. But again the trail vanished. There was no scent to follow. It was as if she had disappeared the moment she stepped into the trees. For the family, each passing hour grew heavier. They watched as professionals took over the ground they had searched themselves the night before. They hoped for answers, for movement, for a signal that Stefanie was near. But all they received was silence. As the day went on, the community stepped forward. Neighbors arrived willing to help. Volunteers gathered at checkpoints, signing in and being assigned areas. Some walked the woods on foot. Others used ATVs to cover ground more quickly. Together they pushed farther and farther from the house. Their voices carried through the trees as they called out Stefanie's name, over and over, with no reply. The investigation widened. Law enforcement began canvassing the area. They knocked on doors, asking neighbors if they had seen or heard anything. They requested access to home surveillance systems, hoping a camera on a driveway or a barn might have caught movement. Businesses in town were asked to review their footage. Each lead was logged. Each angle was tested. None of it brought them closer to finding her. And so the silence deepened. For search teams, this was unusual. A missing teenager, last seen walking into the woods, should leave something behind. A scent, a print, a sighting from a passing car. But in this case, there was nothing. The lack of evidence raised new questions. Did she leave the area by foot? Did someone pick her up? Could she have slipped away without anyone noticing? Theories began to circulate quietly, but none could be proven. As daylight faded, the searchers were forced to pause. Flashlights and spotlights replaced the sun. Helicopters circled overhead, scanning the woods from above. But even from the air, there was no trace. The community, once filled with hope, began to feel fear. How could a 14-year-old vanish in daylight, in a place so familiar? How could so many people search so carefully, and yet find nothing? Families in town kept their children closer that night. Parents locked doors that had been left open for years. New Sweden, once a quiet and trusting town, now carried the weight of suspicion and unease. For the Damron family, the night was unbearable. Every sound outside carried hope. Every light that flickered through the window felt like a sign, but no one came home. Stefanie was still missing. By the time the second day ended, the search had grown larger than anyone expected. Local police, state police, volunteers, canine units, helicopters, all focused on one girl, and still, no answers. It was becoming clear that this was not going to be a simple case of a teenager running off and returning on her own. The silence of the woods, the lack of evidence, and the failure to find even a trace, pointed to something far more complicated. And so, the investigation prepared to escalate. If the Maine State Police could not solve this mystery alone, more resources would be needed. The FBI would soon step in. But before that moment, the town of New Sweden had to come to terms with a haunting truth. Despite all the effort, despite all the manpower, and despite the hope that guided each searcher's step, there was nothing to show for it. No footprints, no clothing, no messages, no sightings, just absence. And so the case grew darker, because when every lead ends in nothing, the fear becomes greater. If Stefanie had not simply walked off, then what happened to her? The second day of searching brought no answers. The woods gave nothing back. The dogs lost the trail almost as soon as it began. Volunteers covered ground again and again, but every path ended in silence. By this point, investigators knew this was not going to be a quick resolution. A missing teenager in a rural town is rare, but normally there are signs. A trail, a footprint, a call, a sighting. Stefanie left nothing, and so the case escalated. The Maine State Police reached out for federal assistance. Within days, the FBI joined the search. Their arrival brought new weight to the case. It was no longer just a local investigation. This was now a national-level concern. They studied the search grids, the canine sweeps, the interviews with neighbors. They retraced the reports of the night she vanished. Everything was checked again. Agents interviewed the family. They pressed for details about the argument. What exactly was said? How long did it last? Was there any history of Stefanie running away? The answers remained the same. She had argued, she had walked out, and she had disappeared. No, she had not run away before. No, she had not made plans to leave. There was nothing to suggest she wanted to vanish. The FBI brought technology into play. Data requests were made. Cell towers in the area were checked for pings. Social media accounts were reviewed. Any online activity that could suggest she had been communicating with someone before she left was scrutinized. Nothing significant was found. Her digital footprints stopped when she stepped into those woods. Meanwhile, the community continued its own effort. Posters with her picture appeared in nearby towns. Her name spread on social media. Parents warned their children not to go out alone. The fear was growing, and the story was spreading. To add urgency, the FBI announced a $15,000 reward. Money offered for any information leading to Stefanie's safe return, or to the arrest of anyone involved in her disappearance. It was a public statement that this case mattered, that she was not forgotten, that answers were needed. But the reward brought something else too. A flood of tips. Phone lines lit up. Messages came in from people who thought they had seen her, or thought they knew someone who did. Investigators followed up on each one, but most led nowhere. Some were honest mistakes, others were dead ends, and a few were malicious. People seeking attention, or worse, hoping to take advantage of the family's pain. For investigators, it was exhausting. Hours were spent chasing rumors, but each rumor reminded them of the truth. No one really knew where Stefanie was. As days turned into weeks, the search changed shape. The immediate grid searches slowed. Instead, the focus shifted to interviews, data collection and analysis. Detectives tried to reconstruct every hour of Stefanie's life leading up to the moment she disappeared. They mapped out her friendships, her routines, her social media activity. They searched for anything unusual, but nothing explained why she would vanish. The lack of evidence created tension. Was this still a case of a teenager who had walked too far and gotten lost? Or was this something darker, an abduction, a crime committed in broad daylight with no witnesses? The FBI considered both possibilities. If she was lost in the woods, she should have been found by now. The search area had been covered many times. Survival in the Maine woods for weeks, especially with no supplies, was nearly impossible. That possibility grew weaker with every day. If she had been abducted, then who? And how? New Sweden is not a busy place. Strangers stand out. A car on West Road would be noticed. Yet no one reported seeing anything unusual. This uncertainty weighed heavily on the town. Families whispered theories. Some believed she had run away with someone she knew secretly. Others feared a stranger had taken her. Each theory brought more fear, but no answers. For the Damron family, the escalation meant more eyes on the case, but also more pressure. Each interview, each news camera, each announcement was a reminder of the silence that still surrounded them. Their daughter was missing, and even the FBI could not bring her back. As the weeks passed, vigils were held. Candles lit in the night, Stefanie's name spoken in prayers. Community groups formed online, dedicated to keeping her face in the public eye. Support poured in, but behind the support was frustration. Why was there still no trace? Investigators, both state and federal, admitted the difficulty. They had resources, manpower, and technology, but without a single lead they were working in the dark. The case was now one of the most puzzling disappearances Maine had seen in years. The escalation brought attention, but it did not bring answers. And that made the mystery grow deeper. Because when state police, federal agents, dogs, helicopters and hundreds of volunteers cannot find a 14-year-old girl in a small town, one question becomes impossible to ignore. Where did she go? And more haunting still, who might have taken her there? When the FBI stepped in, the story of Stefanie Damron's disappearance left the borders of New Sweden. It spread across Aroostook County, and soon after it spread across all of Maine. Local television stations began airing updates. Morning news programs led with her picture. Evening anchors reminded viewers of the reward. Radio stations shared details, reading her description again and again. 14 years old, 5 feet tall, green eyes, brown hair, last seen wearing jeans, a long-sleeved blue shirt, and Harley-Davidson boots. Newspapers carried her story on the front page. Headlines asked the same question the family was asking. Where is Stefanie? Articles described the search effort, the involvement of the FBI, the frustration of the investigators. Readers followed along, hoping each new edition would bring answers. And then the story moved online. Social media became the center of the campaign to find her. Facebook groups appeared overnight. At first a few dozen people joined, then hundreds. Members shared her photo, urged others to keep looking, and begged for any information. Hashtags began circulating on platforms far beyond Maine. Stefanie's name was now being spoken by strangers in other states, even other countries. This movement brought hope. It kept her face visible. It made sure her story wasn't forgotten. Every share, every post, every comment was another attempt to bring her home. Her family joined in. They spoke publicly for the first time, making direct pleas through local television and social media. Her parents stood before cameras, their voices breaking, asking anyone with information to come forward. They described her as a daughter, a sister, a teenager, who should have been safe in her own town. They begged for her return. These pleas reached the community on a deeper level. People in New Sweden who had never met the Damrons now felt connected to their pain. Volunteers multiplied. Fundraisers appeared to help support search costs. Flyers were posted not only in Aroostook County but in surrounding counties as well. Her name was no longer just a headline. It was a mission. And yet, with all this attention, fear began to spread. Parents who once let their children walk to school or ride bikes through town began driving them instead. Playgrounds sat empty. Sleepovers were canceled. The question whispered in every household was the same. If Stefanie could vanish, could it happen to another child? New Sweden, a town that once felt untouched by violence, now felt vulnerable. Neighbors looked at one another differently. Trust was shaken. Doors that had once been left unlocked were now locked tight. Nighttime walks stopped. The rhythms of the community changed. At vigils, hundreds gathered. Candles lit up the dark nights. People prayed, sang, and spoke Stefanie's name aloud. Some hoped she was still alive, others feared the worst. But all agreed on one thing: they could not let her be forgotten. The media covered these vigils, amplifying the emotion. Images of candlelight circles appeared on TV screens across Maine. Clips of her mother's tears aired on the evening news. The story was no longer just about one missing girl. It was about a community shaken to its core. Even as the community rallied, doubts lingered. Whispers about what really happened grew louder. Was this the work of a stranger? Did someone local know more than they were admitting? Theories spread quickly, fueled by the silence of the investigation. Each theory deepened the fear. For investigators, this public attention was both a blessing and a burden. It kept Stefanie's case in the spotlight. It generated tips, but it also brought rumors, speculation, and false leads. Every rumor had to be checked. Every theory had to be tested. And with each one disproven, frustration grew. For the family, the attention was overwhelming. Each interview meant revisiting their pain. Each headline was a reminder of what was missing. They wanted answers, not coverage. They wanted their daughter home. And so the community lived in two states at once, united in hope but divided by fear. The people of New Sweden had changed. The disappearance of one girl had altered the way they lived. It had made them question their safety, their neighbors, even their sense of place in a small town that once seemed immune to such tragedies. Stefanie's absence was not just her family's loss anymore. It was the community's. It was a shadow that stretched across homes, schools, and churches. It was the question that hung over every conversation. Because even with the media coverage, the vigils, the posters, the hashtags, and the pleas, there was still no answer to the question everyone was asking. Where was Stefanie? And if it could happen to her, who might be next? As the weeks passed, the investigation into Stefanie's disappearance grew more complex. The initial urgency of the searches had given way to methodical tactics. The Maine State Police, alongside the FBI, laid out strategies designed to leave no corner unchecked. Search teams used grid patterns. Line after line, they swept through the woods. Volunteers and troopers walked shoulder to shoulder, eyes down, scanning every inch of ground. Each person was told to look for even the smallest sign, a scrap of fabric, a footprint in the dirt, a strand of hair caught on a branch. Nothing was too small to matter. The search extended to water. Ponds, rivers, and streams in the area were checked. Dive teams were called in. Boats dragged the water with sonar equipment. Each splash of the divers carried hope that something would be found. But when they surfaced, they shook their heads. No trace. Investigators turned to interviews. family members, friends, classmates, neighbors. Each was asked the same questions again and again. Did Stefanie ever talk about leaving? Did she know anyone who might have picked her up? Did she seem different in the days before she vanished? The answers were consistent. She was a normal teenager. There were no plans to leave, no secret meetings, no signs she wanted to run away. But in the absence of evidence, theories began to grow. Some believed she had run away after the argument with her sister, that perhaps she had planned to leave, and used the fight as her chance. Others believed she had been abducted, taken quickly and quietly, in a way that left no trace. Investigators considered both. If she had run away, where had she gone? She carried nothing with her, no bag, no phone, no money. A runaway leaves a trail eventually. Friends hear from them. Social media lights up. But in Stefanie's case, there was nothing. No one heard from her. No one saw her. If it was an abduction, then how? New Sweden is small. Strangers are noticed. A car on West Road would stand out. And yet no one reported seeing anything. No witnesses stepped forward. No camera captured a vehicle near her home. The lack of clarity frustrated investigators. They followed every tip. Some came from neighbors, others from distant states. Each time, there was a rush of hope. Each time, the lead collapsed into a dead end. One caller insisted they saw a girl matching her description at a gas station. Investigators checked. It wasn't her. Another claimed she was with an older man in a nearby town. Surveillance cameras proved otherwise. A third caller swore she had been spotted in another state. Again, no evidence. The FBI acknowledged the growing pressure. At press briefings, they reminded the public that Stefanie may be in danger. They urged anyone with information to come forward. They stressed that no tip was too small. Still, the silence continued. Investigators mapped out possibilities. Could she have walked farther than expected and gotten lost in the dense woods? Could she have been taken by someone passing through, someone who left town before anyone noticed? Could she have willingly gone with someone she trusted? Each possibility was examined. None were confirmed. Theories circulated in the community too, at coffee shops, in churches, online groups. Some believed she had been lured away through social media. Others whispered about strangers in town. Others suspected darker possibilities, trafficking, violence, secrets kept hidden. But the truth was that no theory had evidence. And without evidence, no theory could solve the case. For investigators, it was a constant cycle of hope and disappointment. Every new lead was chased. Every rumor was checked. Every piece of land or water was searched. Each time, the result was the same. Nothing. The silence weighed heavily. It was unnatural for a girl to vanish in a small town without a trace. The more time passed, the more unsettling the case became. And so, the investigation pressed on. With no proof of a runaway, and no proof of abduction, the case remained in limbo. But one fact was clear. Stefanie was missing. And the longer she remained gone, the greater the danger became. The FBI made their position known. They did not believe she had simply walked away. They believed she was in danger. And they urged the public to treat the case as such. But even with that warning, the mystery only deepened. Because while the investigation was filled with movement, searches, interviews, briefings, the result was always stillness. A girl gone, a family waiting, a community afraid, and a mystery that refused to give up its answers. A year has passed since 14-year-old Stefanie Damron stepped into the woods and never returned. For her family, each day has been a test of endurance. For investigators, each week has been a reminder of how rare and difficult this case has become. Through late 2024 and into 2025, the search did not stop. Law enforcement continued to treat her disappearance as an active case. Even when headlines faded, the work behind the scenes carried on. Detectives reviewed old leads, re-interviewed witnesses, and compared notes. The FBI remained involved, offering their resources and expertise. The Maine State Police provided occasional updates. Press releases confirmed that tips were still being investigated. They reminded the public that the $15,000 reward was still active. They reassured the community that Stefanie had not been forgotten. But those updates were often short. They revealed little new information. The truth was difficult to face. A year later, no one knew what had happened to her. Despite the lack of progress, the community did not let go. Vigils continued. Each month, people gathered to light candles, say prayers, and speak her name. On the anniversary of her disappearance, crowds filled the local church. Friends, classmates, and neighbors came together to show the family that they were not alone. These vigils carried both hope and grief. Hope that Stefanie might still be found alive. Grief that so much time had passed without answers. At each gathering, the same words were repeated. We will not stop searching. Online, her story remained alive. The Facebook groups continued to post updates. Volunteers kept sharing her photo. Hashtags still circulated, reminding the wider world that Stefanie was missing. Even as other news stories came and went, her case kept a foothold in the public's attention. For her family, life became a painful routine. Each day began with the same question: would today bring news? Some days ended with small flickers of hope, a new tip, a rumor, a phone call. But most days ended in silence. The uncertainty was crushing. Parents of missing children describe it as a wound that never closes. The Damron family lived with that wound every day. For investigators, the silence was just as troubling. They had used every tool available: ground searches, canine units, aerial sweeps, digital analysis. They had interviewed and re-interviewed. They had followed up on every tip, no matter how far-fetched. Yet nothing led to Stefanie. A year into the investigation, detectives faced the same mystery they did on day one. A 14-year-old girl vanished in daylight and left no trace. This case remained one of the most haunting in Maine's recent history. It stood as an example of how even with modern technology, trained investigators and public support, answers are not always found. But the absence of answers did not end the fight. In 2025, law enforcement renewed their commitment. They stressed again that Stefanie's case was not cold. It remained active. They encouraged the public to keep calling in tips. They reminded people of the reward. They asked anyone who might know something, no matter how small, to come forward. The family continued to hold on. Their public statements were brief but powerful. They asked for help. They asked for prayers. They asked for their daughter to be remembered. And the community listened. Each vigil, each fundraiser, each post online was a promise. We will not give up. Still, the questions hung in the air. How does a teenager vanish without a trace? Did she leave willingly, or was she taken? Was she still alive, somewhere beyond the reach of those searching for her? Or had something far worse happened in those woods? A year later, there were still no answers. Only the same silence that began on September 23, 2024. And so the story remained open. The search continued. The reward was still active. The vigil still burned. The investigation still pressed on. But the truth about what happened to Stefanie, was still missing. A 14-year-old girl. An ordinary family argument, a short walk into the woods, and then nothing. No footprints, no messages, no sightings, no trace. That is the story of Stefanie Damron, a teenager who vanished in daylight from a small town in Maine. A case that has now stretched from 2024 into 2025, and still offers no clear answers. Her family waits. Her community mourns. Investigators continue, but the silence remains unbroken. The unresolved nature of this case haunts everyone who follows it. How does a girl disappear in a town where everyone knows each other? How can months of searching by local police, by the Maine State Police, by the FBI, produce no answers at all? The questions echo louder as time goes on. Did someone lure Stefanie away? Was there a hidden conversation, a secret plan no one discovered? Was she taken by a stranger, an abduction carried out so quickly and quietly that no one saw it happen? Or could she still be alive, somewhere far from New Sweden, waiting to be found? We do not know. What we do know is this: her family deserves answers, her community deserves peace, and until the truth is uncovered, this story will not end. Stefanie Damron walked into the woods on September 23, 2024. She never came back. And tonight, as we close this investigation, we are left with the same haunting truth that began it. She is still missing, and the questions remain.